Here we go. Episode number 9. Got to do the clipboard. Love doing the clipboard. So thank you very much. Welcome everyone back to another episode of the Late Bloomer Actor. Me, David John Clark, the Late Bloomer Actor. Today, I've got a great guest out of Adelaide, a Canadian-born and Australian-bred, Tiffany Lyndall-Knight. She's at home on both stage and screen. She's been nominated for 4 Jesse Theater Richardson Awards. Her theatre credits span 8 seasons with Vancouver's Bard on the Beach Shakespeare Festival. Highlights including Ariel, In the Tempest, Olivia, Twelfth Night, Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Reagan in King Lear. She's a graduate of Toronto's acclaimed George Brown Theatre School. Tiffany has taught and created theatre with young people throughout her career. She has developed programs for Bard on the Beach's education division, was a founder of the Gateway Academy of Performing Arts at the Gateway Theatre in Richmond, and has taught at the William Davis Centre for Performing Arts, the University of British Columbia, and the Adelaide Centre for Arts, and is now currently training and teaching students at the Flinders University Drama Centre here in South Australia. On screen, she has appeared in many lead and recurring roles, including the popular television series Battlestar Galactica back in 2004, Da Vinci City Hall 2005, Stargate 1997, and my son's favourite, my wife's favourite, Supernatural, which we do talk about in the episode. So make sure you listen out for that, because something a bit of exciting news there for Connor, who's going to love that one. She was a co-creator and actor in the Feature Festival and won Most Popular Canadian Film at the Vancouver International Film Festival in 2008. It's great to have her on the episode. Tiffany is a big part of the Adelaide acting scene. As I said, she's a lecturer at the Flinders University, as well as National Vice President with the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, the MEAA, being Australians Union. So we have a big chat about all things union with the strike action in the States at the moment, and delve into a little bit about what we talked about last month with Audrey Moore. So if you haven't checked out last month's episode, make sure you do. So here we go. Enjoy the episode, and we'll see you on set. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's morning for me, and it is morning for Tiffany Lyndall-Knight, who we have on the show today. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hello, David. How are you?
I'm good. It's they teased us a bit with spring coming, didn't they? And now it's another winter's day, as I can tell by your nice jumper that you've got on there.
Yeah, it's a chilly day in Adelaide, in the Adelaide Hills.
Wonderful. And I think we both had a child issue this morning with both your daughter and my son had slept in. So it didn't matter too much for me because he had his car to get to school, but you had to quickly dash off and get your daughter to school. Is that correct?
I did. So I'm just going through some of my, my acting techniques of getting centered and getting present here again, but like all good, sort of shaking it all off. So here we are, good to go.
I love it. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. Tiffany, I wanted to have a quick chat to you about all things acting, and you've got a variety of things that we can talk about, which is great. But firstly, just for the viewers that don't know much about you, I was wondering if you could quickly go into who Tiffany Lyndall-Knight is, your background, and how you got into acting and where you are today.
Okay. Feels like a long time all of a sudden. I am an actor and I'm a director, and I also am a lecturer in drama at Flinders University here in Adelaide, South Australia. And I guessed Garnaland, and we're very lucky to be here. And I guess I started acting like so many people do because it was the place where I felt like I found my tribe and my people. As you can probably hear, I'm Canadian, so I'm Canadian Australian, and my accent reflects that. I'm a bit of a hybrid that way. And we moved to Australia when I was about 9, and I really felt that thing of not belonging. I didn't fit in with the Australian sort of sport-loving culture, and people mistook me for a Yank. I got that a lot. And it was, so it was really theater where I first found that I was able to become someone else and transform and find all those other people who wanted to do that as well. And I was very lucky to win a competition in my final year of school in year 12. I won the Bell Shakespeare Theatre competition, which was inaugurated by Sam Wanamaker, who at the time was trying to, he had this crazy dream of rebuilding the Globe Theater. And so as part of his fundraising and awareness building, he did this sort of international competition of getting young people to explore Shakespeare, both in terms of performance and design and music, anything sort of inspired by that. And I won this thing. John Bell and Liz Molinar were some of the adjudicators, and it was that was sort of for me like a defining moment. Well, this is what I meant to do, and I was lucky to go to what was at the time the foundations of the Globe Theater. They were just still building it.
Wow.
And I'm so old now. Oh my God. And there was some fellow I didn't really know called Mark Rylance who took me around and walked me around. And I was, sort of blithely oblivious to the whole thing. But it was extremely exciting. So I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to be an actor. I'll go to NIDA. And I didn't get into NIDA 3 times.
Wow.
So I was told that first time round, they took me aside and said, go and get some life experience. You're too young. So I ended up doing a communications degree for a year and dropping out and going to Canada to spend 6 months in Canada to spend some time with my father. And I just looked up in the yellow pages, theater schools. And I found this little place called Toronto Studio Players. And it was this little theater company, Black Box Theater, that had been built in an old meatpacker's factory. And they had stolen the set from a film called The Fly, starring Jeff Goldblum. They'd stolen the set that had been shot there.
Wow.
And they built this theater. Yeah, it was great. And they said, Tiffany Lyndall-Knight, oh, that's a name we could put on a marquee. And I was, sold by them as well. And I got a little grant. Like within a week, I was on a government grant, making a few $100 a week. And the first thing they did was they said, "You want to design the lighting plot for our Friday night cabaret?" And I went, "Yeah, sure, great. How do I do that?" And the guy said, "Well, there's a bookstore down in Queen West. Go and buy yourself a book and teach yourself how to do it, and we'll help out." So I did, and it was just the most amazing opportunity because I spent a summer there directing and acting. I produced a festival. I learned a little bit about arts administration, and I found my tribe. So and that persuaded me to audition for theater schools in Toronto, and I got my pick, which was so different after being sort of discouraged by NIDA. But I really learned about in that time that you have to find your tribe, and you have to find the training that is right for you and the path that's right for you. So I did this conservatory program at George Brown Theatre School in Toronto, which was 3 years. It was 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Wow.
And then I was ready, very homesick and ready to come back to Australia. But I fortunately was offered by the last director that they brought in, Douglas Campbell, offered me a season at Bard on the Beach Shakespeare Festival, which is it's the biggest Shakespeare festival in Western Canada. So and I was performing in Rep that first year, playing Hero in Much Ado About Nothing, and then just a lady in a green dress in The Merchant of Venice. But that led to 7 seasons with Bard on the Beach and a career in film and TV, and blah blah blah. That's how it started, and then
I love it. We've talked a lot on the podcast about sliding doors, and that's a giant one for you, isn't it? With NIDA saying no, and then sending you on a different path, and then the path has opened that up for you. That is just amazing. So you look back on your life and you go, oh, you wouldn't do it any different way?
No, God, I couldn't do it any different way. No, because if I hadn't gone the way I did, I wouldn't have met my husband and had my kids, So coming back to Adelaide Adelaide was not my hometown. Sydney was my hometown. We came here because my parents had relocated. Adelaide was my mum's hometown. Okay. And so we came and visited and then went, oh, gee, this is a bit of all right. You can still own property. You couldn't do that in Vancouver at that time. It was
Sydney.
Or Sydney. That's right. So it's taken me on a really circuitous journey, but I'm really glad we're here because I had sort of found after 12 years in Vancouver I sort of hit some of the goals that I really wanted to do. I'd done a lot of Shakespeare. I had done a fair amount of film and television there, and I had that experience. And then I went, what else is there? And our family was a real priority. My husband was in the arts as well, and two actors in one of the most expensive cities in the world it was not sustainable. Yeah, it was. And so I thought, well, if I come to Adelaide, I'm not going to be acting as much, but I have an opportunity, hopefully, to teach, and I want to direct more. And I thought my plan was if I directed enough young people and they graduated, they eventually might hire me and or want to collaborate with me. And that actually is sort of what's happened. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
We want to talk. I want to talk a bit about your two biggest things that you have in Adelaide now. So you're a teacher and a lecturer at Flinders University, and we'll go back in a second and talk about that, as well as you're in the our Equities Actors Equity, or the MEAA, the Media Entertainment Arts Alliance, which is the Australian Union for Actors. So I also got a couple of questions there, but you've done really well on the acting side of things, and I'll come back to that as a finish to our podcast, because you've got a bit of a slight cult following on the internet after playing Silent Hybrid, I believe. I'm not sure if you're aware of a bit of a cult thing going on there. How did that all happen? And give us a bit of an insight into that, because that's
the hybrid in Battlestar Galactica. That was Vancouver is really known for at the time it was really known for its sci-fi American television industry, because the weather's a lot like it is here in Adelaide today. It's often very misty, very rainy, and, evocative and mysterious. And it also can look like a big American city. And so Vancouver was, it was called Hollywood North at the time, because the dollar is better for American production, and we have great crews and great actors. But the problem for Adelaide, or for Vancouver actors at the time, was that they were getting a lot of sort of what we call 50-worders here, or day players, bit parts, maybe, principals and stuff, but not a lot of opportunities to do those like really significant leading roles. And Battlestar Galactica was a real groundbreaker for that. Corinne Mairson was the casting director on that, and she really pushed to have Canadians in some of the major fundamental roles. And so everyone was really excited about that prospect. And I had been auditioning for Heidi and Corinne for years. I worked as a reader for them in auditions quite a lot. So they sort of knew me, and they brought me in for this role of the hybrid. And so the hybrid, for those who aren't familiar with Battlestar Galactica, which was a remake of the original, the hybrid is like the brain of all the Cylon ships. So the whole fleet is controlled by this half human, half machine that lies in a vat of water and sort of spouts psychobabble and like basically climaxes, and that lets the whole ship go into hyperspace.
Wow.
So yeah. So they gave me this really, really strange piece of text to work on for my audition that was really just it was like a poem, but out of technical jargon. And I had done a lot of Shakespeare. So I really thought, I'll take this piece apart like a piece of text, like a dense piece of 600-year-old text. And the character sort of channels all this information and feeds it, and then sort of spouts it out like an oracle. So I had just had my second child, my daughter. So she was about 6 months old. And I kind of imagined, well, I wonder if the hybrid is kind of like being in utero, where you hear all this information and you sort of interpret it in a way that has no frame of reference to the outside world. And that was sort of my path into trying to find this character. And I guess it worked, because I got the part. And it was such a thrill, because I was a huge fan. I'm a big sci-fi fan anyhow.
Love it.
And a really close friend of mine, Alessandro Giuliani, had a significant role on that part. He played Gaeta on that role. So we knew the show a lot from the outside. So it was, I won't lie, one of the biggest thrills of my life to walk onto that set and to see it all in 3D after watching it in 2D for so
Wow.
long.
I love it. I mean, I have to admit, I actually haven't seen the series. I was a big fan of the original,
Yeah.
and it's certainly on a long list of TV series that I'm trying to catch up on. So I will certainly get around to seeing it because I think it's the Big Bang Theory promoted it a lot with the actress. I've forgotten her name now because one of the characters on Big Bang Theory loves her. So
Oh
I did.
yeah, yeah.
That was
It's
brilliant.
well, Time magazine at the time said it was one of the best television shows of all time. So it is like it's a very different from the original. I think you'd really enjoy it. It was
I
pretty
will.
groundbreaking. Yeah.
I've seen components of it and trailers and stuff, and certainly love what they've done to it because I mean the original series was quite it was old and very different, of course, and we got new technology to make better stuff, so that's fantastic. And just quickly while we're there, you also did Connor, my son, will love this, and I had to ask. You did an episode on Supernatural, which is also filmed up in Canada, correct?
I did. I
Yeah.
did do a role at Super. It's amazing how that's still just that just keeps on going, that show.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love it. We finished watching it, and I remember sitting the last episode, Connor sitting with my wife Kelly, and they're bawling their eyes out when it
Oh,
finished and it was all over. It was so sad and hilarious from my point of view. So, um,
yeah.
did you get to meet the boys, Jensen and Jared, at all?
I did. I did
Oh,
meet them. Yeah.
Connor's
But
going to love that.
oh, yeah, I did. That it was interesting. I mean, that was one of those examples where I was a day player, and so you learn when you get on different sets. You really do have to learn what the lead actors need and what they want, and how much they're going to engage with you and how much they don't. And so that one, like it was, that was very much one of those ones where you were told that's great that you've made all these choices, but your job is to be a functionary and just give the information and get
Okay.
off the set.
That's interesting,
Yeah,
isn't it? Mm.
yeah.
Oh, beautiful. All right. Well, let's just step away from the acting a little bit and we'll come back to that at the end. You're currently a vice president with the MEAA and have been for, is it pushing 2 years now or a bit longer?
It's about 2 years now. Yeah.
Yeah. So last month I spoke with Audrey Moore out of Los Angeles in relation to the current strike action by writers and actors that's on in LA. I think they're into their second month now for actors and a bit longer for the writers. As an Australian union leader with the MEA, what's your take on the strike action and how does it affect Australian production and actors?
Yeah, look, it's an exciting time to be a union member, particularly I think in Australia unionism has really suffered since the Howard era, and the unions in Australia like the acting union has historically not had the same sort of clout as the unions in the United States because of the way government has sort of restructured things. And with the changes right now, with the Labor government right now, there is certainly a real upswell of excitement that we might be able to have, industrial bargaining again for the first time. And it's such an important time for I think for artists to be able to work as like a canary in the coal mine, really, for so many of the issues that the wider economy is dealing with in terms
Mm.
of, the gig economy and the rights of precarious workers. And of course, the impacts of artificial intelligence on the work that we do.
Mm.
So MEAA stands in solidarity with SAG-AFTRA and with the Writers Guild as well. At the moment, we've had a couple of productions up in Queensland that have been impacted. So productions that have had to be shut down because they had lead actors who are SAG-AFTRA members who have stepped away from work. And that's meant that equity members, particularly in crew, have been impacted. A couple of hundred equity members have been impacted by that. But we support the action. We recognize that the issues that our comrades are fighting for are the ones that are going to be. It's only a matter of time before they're impacting us here.
Definitely.
That said, though, I should point out, though, I mean, in terms of the AI issue, I mean, we've all heard the story of extras being given $100 or $150 for, indefinite use of their image.
Yeah.
That actually is a clause that's written out of our agreements in Australia. So we do not allow productions to use a person's image outside of that production. So that's actually sort of been a test case for some of the productions that have been coming here from the United States, and they are taking note of the limitations that we've got in place in our agreements.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, AI, I mean, they could just make actors anyway. So why would they want to scan an actual person in? I can see the benefit. They want real people. Well, then pay for it, or go and make a computer image. I mean, I think it's going to be a thing anyway. And if it hasn't already happened, I mean, you look at a crowd scene of 10,000 people in a stadium or Coliseum for Game of Thrones or something, they would have to be computer generated. So we can't stop that from happening. But I do see the pros of that we have to allow people to have their image. And I think it came down to consent and compensation was the biggest thing they talk about. That is the AMPTP in America. They want to take that away, take away your consent and take away your compensation, which is disgusting.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And, and as you say, compensation is the other huge issue that, so that the SAG-AFTRA are fighting for their rights with residuals, because the model has just changed so quickly with streaming services. And that's an issue that we're dealing with as well here in Australia. We're currently in negotiations right now for with our theatre organizations. So our Performers Collective Agreement is under negotiation right now. And one of the things that we're fighting for in that area, as well as compensation, to recognize how the cost of living has so severely impacted the economy, is we're also dealing with, the desire of theater companies to be able to digitize productions and use that as a product. And that's also a concern. There's pros and cons to that. By digitizing and live streaming or filming productions, yes, it gives an opportunity for regional areas to see these productions. It provides access. However, on the other hand, that could completely undercut our thriving touring industry in theaters, and there's something so important about regional companies, regional people, communities being able to see live actors doing their work and connecting with an audience in that way. So there is so much change. It's an exciting time, but also we have to have the workers have a voice, have a collective voice to be able to identify that they are a fundamental part of the equation and need to be recognized, and compensated for that.
Because productions don't work without actors or crew.
Well, that's right.
And there's so much money involved. And I think they've talked about a little bit of the money of what the unions in America are looking for, what SAG-AFTRA is looking for. And the percentage of an increase is minuscule to the money that the leaders are taking away. And I think one of the biggest problems we have on social media with this strike is that people go, oh, woe is me, the actors want more money. But they're thinking of the Tom Cruises in the world that get paid millions and millions of dollars, which, good for them, that's great. But 98% of actors can't afford to put food on their table in America. So that's where it's wrong. It's disgusting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're seeing that again. I mean, our industry has been at the front edge of identifying these sort of inequities that are a bigger issue across the whole economy. And I think that's why it's important that we keep these issues alive in the public sphere. Because, I mean, we're seeing with the Qantas right now, the vast income that Alan Joyce has been walking away with the shares that are being taken as a part of his package, while the workers are struggling and the population is struggling. So I think one of the advantages of, one of the important roles that our union has is that we are the storytellers. We are the communicators. And we should be able to use those skills to not just talk about the actors, but how the actors, I mean, we've been the gig workers long before they were gig workers. We understand what precarity is, and we can share that story, because if you can take advantage of one industry, it's very easy for that to spread
across the thing. And that leads into something that I did talk again last month with Audrey about this, and it's a big thing that I follow. I came across an article in the Equity magazine from January last year where you were discussing the benefits of UBI, universal basic income, which for the arts sector, but also for many sectors, which is what we've just talked about. I've been following research on UBI for years now, and I'm truly disappointed that it's never really takes hold wherever it's discussed. It's been discussed in America and Europe, and I believe in Australia as well. What's your take on that, and where do you get your background from UBI, and how do you see it being great for actors or our economy and just all workers in general if it was to be implemented in some way?
Oh, look, there's been so much research conducted in small pockets. There was, Ireland currently is trialing a UBI system specifically for the arts. But there have been examples for wider communities. In, I think, Saskatchewan, there was one in the 1950s or 60s. Sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head. And in pockets and communities all around the world, there's been many examples of the success of it, not only providing opportunities for people to work and to study, but also to care, to finally actually reflect how there is, an economic quantification, or should be, to the caring that we do in our society. There's so much data about how levels of depression drop away when people have a basic income, or how they have the opportunity to retrain, to educate, and to give to their community in ways that we don't normally value. And, frankly, I mean, you can see that we had our own little, enforced example of that with JobKeeper during COVID. And there was a great amount of evidence that, and we see it in our community in the arts, but also in the wider community, of people having, enormously reduced levels of anxiety and depression. I know from anecdotally, a wonderful actor, Patrick Graham, who I know, he's one of our local actors here in South Australia, and his brother Duncan Graham, who's a very successful playwright. Patrick was telling me a couple of months ago that it was only because of JobKeeper, for the first time in his long career, that he's actually had a steady income for any point of time. And during that time, he started a production company, and he and Duncan produced a film that opened the Adelaide Film Festival last year. So it was, it was not a lot of money that we were given, that was doled out to people, but it has reaped enormous rewards long term for individuals, but also, I would say, for the community as well.
Yeah, and it's not about free money per se, is it? We use the concept that we talked about, how at Woolworths you used to have 10 checkout chicks, as they call them here in Australia, working, and you go through and they scan all your shopping in, or in the old days they type it in. But now we'll have one checkout person and 10 or 15 computers. But Woolworths, Coles and Audi, all the companies, they're making the same profits, if not more. So that money, those profits to those businesses, is going into the coffers of richer people, the people who can afford to buy shares. But we're going to get to a point where we've got all these companies making all these profits, but they don't have any employees, because the computers are doing it and AI are doing it. Good or bad, that's the way we're going. So I think we need to find a way to share those profits. And the benefits of UBI is tenfold. It gives the people the ability to do what they want to do. You can do the job that you want. If you want to do an actor, then you can become an actor, and you've got that income there to be able to feed yourself and feed your family and do the art that you want to do. So I think it's all positives there, and I think it's something that needs to be looked at.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you can argue the value of a UBI from a a left socialist point of view, but also from a more conservative point of view.
Mm,
It makes a lot of sense as well because you're cutting out an enormous amount of bureaucracy and red tape. If you give everyone a universal basic income, then the issues that we've seen in the in terms of robo debt, the social services, the waiting lists to get to talk to Centrelink,
mm,
the privatization of the retraining organizations. There's a lot of waste and there's a lot of red tape that's going into that infrastructure that can pretty much be excised
mm.
if we simply give everybody enough. And I think we do. I think we do have the resources to do that. But David, it's going to take a long time before, ideologically we get to that place.
Certainly.
But we've seen that change happens quickly. And I'm just trying to remember the book that I read. I'm going to Google it. Oh, I know I turned off my phone and I don't think I can Google it right now. You'll have to put it in a link. But Utopia for Realists. Utopia for Realists is a wonderful book, and I can't remember who wrote it off the top of my head. But as he points out, when you go, oh, it's a utopian idea. It's so idealistic to suggest this would happen. Yeah, well, we didn't think that women would have the right to vote 100 years ago. Things can change enormously quickly. We've seen with JobKeeper, we've seen with Black Lives Matter, we've seen with Me Too, how fast things can change when we have a crisis. And we're in a crisis right now, so we're getting pretty good at change. So I'm optimistic.
That author is Rutger Bregman.
Thank you. It's a great book.
Google.
I highly recommend it.
That's awesome. It's certainly something that I'm very interested in, and I'm going to be following it up. I've joined I think there's a university in Sydney that's doing UBI. I just see so many benefits of it, and you alluded to it a bit there, is we can change the whole tax system to you get your basic income, and anything you earn above that, we just tax it a standard 30%. We don't have to have enforcement. We don't have to have compliance. Your tax offices, the costs of that would be so brought down, and everyone would be paying their fair share. If you go out and I believe in capitalism, I believe in working for your money. If you're making $100 million a year, then fine, but pay 30% tax on it. And then the rest of us, the people who can't do that, or the ones that have to stay home and look after their parents, or the actors and or teachers, etc., they can all have that basic cost of living covered, and everything above that's a positive. So certainly something to look into, and hopefully, who knows what the future will bring. So
yeah, you got to get the word out there, and then you vote. That's how we make the difference.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So also in your role as MEAA, I was reading you were involved in a conference on sexual harassment and bullying in the industry. This is back in 2018. Can you tell me a bit about that? Just 5 years later, has it changed? Because we all know what came out of America with certain cast, production guys. I won't mention names. Let's not get too political. But it's been an issue. I mean, it's not just acting, of course. It's what life has been. How has that changed? Has it changed enough, or is it still changing?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, again, that's another great example of how change happened in our industry, but that really just sort of, because we are the industry of communicators, it lifted the lid on an issue that's pervasive, and we're seeing it, in sports right now. It's unbelievable what we're seeing with the, Spanish coach, whatnot, and how just how casual still sexual harassment is, and how there is pushback. So, no, in short, no, things haven't completely changed, but in our industry, there are some really exciting initiatives that have, we're already in the process of happening before Me Too, but certainly have been brought to the forefront as a result of that movement. We now have, so Equity has developed the intimacy guidelines for producers, both for screen and for theater. And this is also something, we're negotiating right now with the PCA to ensure that those guidelines are acknowledged. And that's a very comprehensive list that was created by our members in the industry about the expectations around the proper choreography and maintenance of intimate scenes in theater and film. And intimacy is not just about sex. Intimacy can also be any sort of intimate touch between, a parent and a child, or an elder and a young person in a scene. So we have those guidelines in place, and that's been that's sort of changed the industry. Equity also funded a number of scholarships so that we could have intimacy choreographers and directors in each state in Australia. And I know for a fact that our South Australian president, Ruth Fallon, is one of those recipients of that scholarship.
Awesome.
And she does not stop working. She's unbelievably busy. So it's exciting to see how the industry has responded enthusiastically. And it's also interesting to see, in my, working in the education sphere, how the next generation of artists are so cognizant of these issues and are becoming really well versed in these issues. So, we have well-being practices in place at Flinders that we implement from day one, about consent and touch and finding language to be able to identify the difference, I guess, between what is uncomfortable and unsafe. And that's a really important distinction, because of course we have to be able to go to uncomfortable places. That's part of our job as storytellers, is to talk about the difficult things in life and the whole complex experience of being human. But you never want to put an artist, director, or performer in a position of feeling unsafe. And so that's really what the principles are there for.
And I think it's also about having that ability and that confidence to be able to stand up and say, hey, I don't feel comfortable, or I don't think what I'm seeing is right, to being able to say, stop filming, I need to talk to someone. And that's one of the biggest things, is people never standing up for other actors or other people because they just didn't feel comfortable or have the confidence to do so. So I think that's fantastic. One thing that I would like to ask you, now, as a union member myself, I can go to my union, I can ring you, I can ring the union up in Melbourne and say, hey, I've got this problem. I've had a lot of actors reach out who are just going on student films or indie films. So they're not productions that are paid for. They're not covered by regulations and the MEAA awards, etc. What can actors do when they don't think that the right thing's happening, especially in the relation to intimacy? And that I had one person discuss to me about, she was concerned about what was happening on the film that she was auditioning for. So how can they reach out if they're not in the union, for one thing? What scopes, what avenues do they have to protect themselves?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, this is an important thing. If it's a non-union contract, the union is limited in what they can actually do. So we as performers have an opportunity as union members to be able to access the resources and information that the union has. So if that person was a union member, they have access to the intimacy guidelines. And I would say being educated is the first step. Then you have and you have the opportunity to be able to provide those to that producer and say, no, this is the practice, this is industry standard, this is the expectation, and I'm not going to accept anything less, frankly. So, I mean, ultimately it does boil down to actors being confident enough to say no. Being confident enough to say, I'm going to walk away. Because if we all chip away at those rights, then how do we ever have enough collective power to be able to defend those rights? Exactly. So, yeah, ultimately, it's a tough call. I know we all love to perform and we will do anything to be able to do it, but that's where they get you.
Cool. And the guidelines are they're free on the internet. You can find them.
That's right. They are freely available on the Equity
I put
website.
something on my on the Facebook group for Adelaide actors and extras that films were to have, if there was any intimacy involved, they would had to have an intimacy coordinator. And someone rightly reached out and said, "Oh, hang on, how can we afford that if it's a student film?" I said, or an indie film. I said, I understand that, but you need to be able to show that you followed the guidelines, which is a simple printout from the internet, and just make sure that people are covered and that actors have that ability to stand up and say, I don't want to do that. Let's find another way to film the same scene. That's all that matters, isn't it?
That's right. And look, I understand, of course, hiring an intimacy choreographer or director is an investment. There's no question about that. And an intimacy director's job is more than just being in the room and watching and being a chaperone. I mean, in film, they're involved in a lot of liaison in terms of contracts. There's other levels that they're actually working with, which I can, of course, would be prohibitive for a student film or not practical for a student film. However, there are other organizations and avenues just to think about these basic ideas about consent. And one of those that I would recommend is an organization called Theatrical Intimacy Education. And that's an American-based organization. And they conduct online classes that are pretty reasonable because their philosophy really is that ultimately we all have a right to understand these principles and should be able to apply these principles. And there's there's really some core fundamental stuff about boundaries and consent and some really useful, techniques that they teach in their courses. And also there's a book that they offer that's a fantastic book, just about some principles about how you can choreograph, working as a non-specialist, or how you can work with two actors working together with different techniques and just a different language about how to approach that. And so that's something that we really draw on with, at an education level as well.
I love it. And, my podcast is directed at a lot of actors who aren't working professionally or in paid roles. So it's certainly something to think about when you're in your independent and your student films, that there are avenues to reach out if you're feeling uncomfortable or you just even have a question. So thank you very much for that, Tiffany.
Yeah.
Now, is it correct? Are you Dr. Tiffany Lyndall-Knight?
I am a doctor, a doctor of theater.
Theater. So you did a PhD at Flinders Drama, I believe, and that's where you're actually teaching now. Is that correct?
That's right. I finished I did practice-led research, and I completed my PhD in 2018. I was awarded my degree.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Now, a lot of your research, I read that into acting. So just to bring it back to acting, is you've researched into how actors can develop engaged, authentic relationship with their audiences. That's one of the biggest things you looked into. Is this a natural ability for actors, or is it something that can be taught or developed with experience?
I think it can be taught. Yeah, so my PhD was, I did a practice, like I said, it was practice-led research. So that means that I created a work, or I was involved in the creation of an artistic piece, and then I wrote about it as part of my exegesis. And the piece that I was investigating was a one-person show that I performed called 19 Weeks by Adelaide playwright Emily Steele. And so that piece was my tagline, which sounds a bit facetious, but it says what it is, which is it was a show about abortion that was performed in a pool. So Emily wrote this piece based on her lived experience of having a late-term abortion after she had a diagnosis of a fetal abnormality. And she felt very strongly that she needed to tell this story because there were no stories out there. And as a playwright who believes deeply in telling stories about women's complex experiences, she had to put her money where her mouth was. And so she didn't pull her punches, and she used her name, but I played her.
Wow.
And we did it in a pool because people, she and the director at the time were concerned that would be so confronting. We needed to find a way to encourage people to come for a different reason. And so people put their feet in the water with me as I was performing. So they were literally immersed in that story with me. And it was a really unbelievable experience because I could see them, I could look right into their eyes, and they could see me, pretty much virtually naked. So it was a very vulnerable experience on both sides. And they became my scene partners. Really, as a one-person show, I had to, look right into their eyes and tell them this story, and how they responded really did affect my performance.
I can
So
imagine. Wow.
yeah. So the techniques, I guess to answer your question about can you learn this, I train people in Meisner's techniques. So Sanford Meisner has really become quite popular in the last 10 or 15 years. I've been teaching it for quite a while now. I studied those techniques when I was at theater school, in the 90s. But he really focuses on a whole series of scaffolded exercises that encourage the actor to place all their focus, all their attention on the other person, and respond in a very mindful and present way to exactly what they're giving you. And yeah, I think I think it really does work. It's really beneficial to actors because so many of us come into the industry going, oh, I want to be seen, and I want to be, I want people to see me, or I want to disappear into this character, or I want the applause, or I want the, la 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 la, and that can turn into becoming very self-conscious. And so these techniques are really useful because it's a constant reminder that what's really important is the other person, and we respond to their behavior. And so that was exactly what I did in that show. Just the audience was the other person in that scene, and I had to be, completely attuned to their sensitivities. So sometimes I would see a woman in the audience who was glaring at me. She did not agree with this decision at all. And I had to really, defend myself or explain the choice. Sometimes I had people sobbing uncontrollably, and I had to really console them and reassure them that it was going to be okay. So it makes it it was a really, really lively communion between the audience and myself. Yeah.
The learning outcomes from that must have been amazing, just for your research, but also as an actor, to have that response, because we all do everything in front of a camera. So we're doing our audition with the blankness of a camera there, or even on set, there's cameras and lights, and it doesn't have that realism, is it? And is that where I find, I was told last year that a lot of my auditions weren't standing out. Now that's about as much of the advice I got. So standing out in what way? I don't stand out. My acting was no good. It was hard to tell. But I think that is exactly what we're talking about, isn't it? Is finding that being able to reach your audience, whether it's in an intimate environment like yours, or just down the barrel of the camera, and knowing that 10 weeks later it'll be on the big screen somewhere. So how do you reach that person sitting in that darkened cinema that you may never meet in real life?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that Meisner is particularly useful for screen work for that reason, because it really, for a couple of reasons. One because, as you say, it can be so distracting and also intimidating to be on set where there's a crew guy who's checking his phone, or people wandering around, or in the audition the producer is eating sushi while you're trying to do your piece, and you get very distracted by that. So by crafting an imagined other, I think, and finding all the details in advance in your preparation of who that person might be and what your relationship with them might be, or even rehearsing that with the other person, and putting all that focus on really forcing yourself to listen to them, means that you're tuning the instrument to be really available and flexible when you get into that really unnatural environment. And and if you have the good fortune of actually having a reader when you go into your audition, it means that you are used to then playing off of what they give you, as opposed to what you sort of locked up and prepared in advance. And it's also really useful then because it allows you to be receptive to the idea of being fresh from take to take. If you're shooting, all day long, and you're doing, the reality is now we get 3 takes because deadlines are so tight. But, if you have to do it 15 times, you are reminded of the fact that it's not about what you invented before or thought about earlier that you've got to sort of summon again, but really you've got to be available to the present moment and be alert and alive to whatever subtle nuances that other person is giving you. And that's what you're being fueled by and responding to.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it's a really exciting sort of mindful way of acting, I guess.
Okay, and that sort of leads into the question of as a lecturer at the university. So you teach parts or components of the 3-year Flinders drama degree. Do you believe that actors need that formal training? My son's in year 12 at the moment, so he's just applying for university, and he wants to be an actor. But we're trying to look at the balance of, does he go and do the 3-year acting degree, or does he go and do a degree of his plan B, so to speak? So he's very into filmmaking as well. So he's doing a vet course at the moment to filmmaking. So I think we're leaning towards doing a degree for filmmaking so he can get a job. But and then still get some acting training behind. I think he's looking at the UCA, the undergraduate certificate of acting at Flinders. But what's your thoughts on formal training for actors, whether they're coming out of year 12 or the late bloomers like myself in our 50s?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, first, I hope he comes and does the undergraduate certificate because I teach that, so that would be really fun to meet him. But look, I think that we always hear stories of people who go into the industry without any training. Mitchell Butel, who's our artistic director of State Theatre Company, is not formally trained, but he did an enormous amount of theatre through other avenues. And I think that we all choose our own path, but what I feel is really valuable about training is not only that you're going to be exposed to a whole bunch of different techniques and practitioners and ideas, but you're also going to make contacts, and you're going to build collaborative networks that are going to carry you and sustain you through an entire career. So, the Bachelor of Performance at Flinders, which is going to be launched next year. So we've got the Bachelor of Performance in Acting and Directing, and then the Theatre Maker degree, which your son might be interested in because that's the undergraduate certificate is sort of woven into that.
Gotcha.
That course is teaching you those core acting principles or directing principles that you would get in a conservatory environment, but it's also giving you the opportunity to do wider electives and within a wider university environment. And I think that's a particularly interesting and exciting model, that, 3 years of just being in a conservatoire, doing your acting and your voice and your movement is a pretty narrow strand. And for some people, going very, very deep in that is what they want, and that's fantastic. But I think that the reality of the industry that we live in and we work in is that no one is going to be a full-time actor all the time. It's an incredibly small group of people who do that. And you need, which has always been the way, but even more so now, particularly if you're based in a regional city. And so having the opportunity to build your skills in creating your own work, in becoming an entrepreneur and becoming a business person, and looking at the industry as a whole is crucial for longevity and for sustainability. So, I would say in terms of your son, like how wonderful that he's getting this lived experience of working in screen and investigating screen from the perspective of production side. All those skills will feed into what he wants to do ultimately. But life is very long. And I think the best advice I ever got was, don't choose a job, choose an industry, because you don't know you think you know what that job is, to be an actor, to be a director. You have no idea though, until you actually do it. But if you know you love the industry, that you love the people, you love the making process, you love the creative process, you love the lifestyle, then there's so many avenues for you within that industry. Beautiful. And training allows you to meet all those people in all those ways.
Awesome. That's awesome advice. And now I'm mindful of the time, so I'll start to wind up. I just wanted to ask you now, I know you also train actors in voice and dialects. So 2 quick questions in this area as we wind up. How important is voice training for actors? And can anyone become proficient in an accent, even tone deaf actors like myself? I struggle with, obviously as Australian actors, we really need to have an American accent, especially there's so many American shows and films get made out here. So I just struggle to get it. So do you think that it can be taught 100%? Is it?
Well, to be honest, I haven't. I'm teaching less and less voice and dialect stuff at the moment, so I'm not the expert anymore. Not that I would ever consider myself the expert at any particular time, but I would say I've had to work in dialect a fair amount. And in terms of so that's you had two questions. So in terms of voice training, I think is essential, because it's not just about making it you sound loud enough or beautiful enough. You know, the training that I've explored is really about how to find an imaginative way through sound and through text, and being able to sort of penetrate text in a non-intellectual way past your first sort of pass or your first choice with a piece of text means that realistically you're going to have a way more authentic interpretation, and that's going to make you stand out when everyone they see is you finding the same sort of general interpretation of the text. Your sort of inventive, imaginative exploration through it might mean that you find a connection or an image or an inflection that resonates in an entirely different way. So in that way, I think voice work is really, really valuable. The breath component of voice work allows you to connect with the emotions in a way that I think is really useful, and makes the actor again really vulnerable. So I think that we should all do voice work. Yeah. Now, dialect work. Can anyone do a dialect? Oh gosh, I don't know. I think you can if you spend the time and you invest the money in the training and immerse yourself in it. It's like any language. If you go and you drop yourself into that culture and you mimic and you listen, plus look at the sort of tools that you need to be using, the technical tools, I think you will pick it up if you're committed to doing it. But it's, even, we have this notion of, the Kate Winslets and the Meryl Streeps being, effortlessly able to, parrot off all these accents. Kate Winslet has a dialect coach with her on every show. She's working on it every morning before she goes into set. She has the opportunity to go into post-production and retape things. So it's a craft. It's a craft, and like any craft, it needs work.
Awesome. Yeah, fair enough. And I'll certainly be sticking to it. That's for sure. I'll get it one day. So, all right, Tiffany, thank you very much for coming on the show. I've absolutely loved our chats, both on the union side of things and going as deep as the UBI. It's brilliant. I think there's something for all our listeners there to take away. As we wind up, is there any piece of advice that you'd like to give to us? There were struggling actors out there, whether they're young, old, or seasoned, like myself, to push their journey forwards. What would you like to tell people?
Gosh. Well, choose the industry, not the job, is one that I constantly resonate with. I had an agent, my favorite agent in Vancouver, who used to say, keep this mantra going. The money is coming. It will not stop. The money is coming. It will not stop. Put it on your wall. Just, paint your house with it. But I think the best piece of advice I've heard recently was, it's from a podcast that I listened to, a Canadian podcast called We Regret to Inform You. And the advice is, it's wonderful accounts of so many people who have failed in so many ways, but they just keep on going. And the tagline is never, ever, ever, ever give up.
Awesome.
And
I love it.
I think it's true. Never give up.
If you love it, keep doing it. And I think my agents have always said, if you stop having fun, that's when you need to start looking at something else.
Yeah. I mean, it stops being fun. It's a job. No job is fun all the time, but you've got to find those areas and really question yourself about what your definition of success is. I guess that would be the other thing. Like, really, what is success to you? If it's making a living from it, whatever that living is, then you have to make choices about that. But if it's to be connecting and growing and sustained and learning, you can do that in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places.
Now, are you still acting? So you're very, very busy with obviously teaching at Flinders and with your MEAA. So you still have the goals to be on set and working here in Adelaide or traveling the world if they offer you anything anywhere else?
Absolutely. Yep. Call me. You can find me at Flinders. I got a couple of days on a TV show coming up here in a couple of months, which is great. But I'm directing more than acting at the moment, and I'm really enjoying that too.
Because we've had two connections. We've been on Pine Gap together, not together, but you've done a voiceover on Pine Gap, and I was on Pine Gap. And Connor's first appearance on screen was with me on A Sunburnt Christmas. So that was fun. We were in the scene where you at the Christmas dinner.
That's right.
So that was great to be involved in your journey together. So, Tiffany, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on board. And as I like to say, I'll see you on set.
See you on set, David. Thanks for the opportunity.